He's run Russia for more than 2 decades, but he wants to stay in power even longer. Vladimir Putin signed laws that could keep him in office until 2036. What's behind this hunger for control? Is Putin a president for life? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. For more than 20 years, he's been the most powerful man in Russia. And this week, President Vladimir Putin made sure he could retain that position until 2036. With the signing of a new law, he can now run for another 2 6-year terms once his current stint ends. And if he does, it would make him Russia's longest ruling leader, surpassing Joseph Stalin. His critics call it a constitutional coup designed to make Putin president for life. His supporters say it means stability for the government. Since first becoming president in 2000, Putin has, you might say, managed to change the rules to stretch his influence. He initially served 4 years and then another 4 when he was voted in again. But the Russian constitution said at that time 2 terms was the limit. So when Putin's time was up in 2008, he handed the reins to his colleague Dmitry and he became prime minister. But many say he continued behind the scenes as the real leader. So much so that in 2012, Medvedev stepped aside and Putin again stood for president. By this time, presidential terms had been extended to 6 years. Putin won and again in 2018, securing power until 2024. But there's now been another change in the constitution. Last year, voters agreed Putin should have the chance to serve another 2 terms. His apparent overwhelming popularity and aggressive stance against critics makes that seem almost guaranteed. Let's bring in our guests in Moscow. Dmitry Babich is a political analyst at InoSMI Internet Project. In Rome, Marco Di Liddo, head of the Russia and Balkans desk at the Center for International Studies. Also in Moscow, Alexander Soloviev, a member of the Russian opposition and former chairman of Open Russia. Welcome to the program. Dmitry, first of all, what is Putin trying to say here? Is he saying that he wants to cling to power forever?
Well, first, I would like to tell you that it was not really possible for him not to sign that law because the law was basically voted at the referendum last year by 77% of the people who took part in the vote. But I think the situation is misrepresented in a lot of the Western media. First, they say that he has been running Russia since the year 2000. That's not exactly true because in 2008, yes, he handed the reins of power to Dmitry Medvedev. And Medvedev, for example, decided not to support Colonel Gaddafi at the UN vote in 2011. Putin was openly opposed to that decision of Medvedev. But Medvedev, pushed his way through, and the result was that Colonel Gaddafi was murdered in a very, very cruel way, as you know, and Libya is still in a civil war. So Putin was openly opposed to it, but that's what happened.
Okay.
The other problem is that in 2024, he may not be running, as well as in 2030. I think that Western media are taking that decision for him. He has not announced his decision to run again, and I'm not sure he will run in 2024, not to speak of 2030.
Marco, if you look at the pattern of the tenure of President Vladimir Putin from 2000, you get that sense of someone who is determined to further just extend the term limit, the term limits again and again. Could this be an indication that the man is eager to have some sense of immunity against any prosecution if he retires?
It depends on which kind of social and national group can feel and can perceive that. I think the perception abroad and in Russia is different. Basically, the law can protect him for future judicial prosecution for the act that he has did and he will do as president. I agree with my colleague in Moscow. Sometimes there is a different perception of the figure of Vladimir Putin in Russia and in the rest of the world, and the same is about internal Russian affairs. But I think we can agree that after so many years in power, there is a growing feeling and desire of change in Russian society toward the top part of the government, especially in this moment in which the economy is suffering. And when the economy suffers, the political support and legitimation starts to crumble a little bit, even for a big man and big political VIP at international level like Vladimir Putin.
Alexander, if you go back to 2008, Putin had different choices. He opted for putting a placeholder, Medvedev, and then coming back after 4 years. This time he decided for a different tactic, which is basically to reset the clock on the time limit and start from scratch, which is going to be another 12 years. How do you see this move by Putin?
Well, actually, I should say that was looking quite weird, because if we go back to January 2020, when the authorities announced this constitutional reform, everything was looking like something big is upcoming. But then it all ended up in this reset, which looked pretty stupid. So everybody expected him to stay in power, of course, because he's a typical dictator. He's now in power for more than 20 years, and I cannot, with all due respect, I cannot agree with Dmitry that Medvedev was a real president. I mean, this is ridiculous for all the Russians who live here. Putin was planning to stay in power, but at the very beginning of 2020, it looked like he was planning probably to stay in power by some other tactic. But suddenly it appeared that he just decided to reset the constitution, and he didn't even use referendum for this, because it was not referendum. It was a fake voting that was called nationwide voting, which has nothing in common with the real procedure of referendum. I think the plan was probably a little bit different. Then something probably happened and he changed his mind, or probably we just don't know something, because now it looks like, well, okay, no one is surprised that he wants to stay in power forever. I don't think he's gonna be alive by 2036. But anyway, his access to the medicine, unlike the rest of the Russians, is of course very high, and he's got all the possibilities to stay alive for a very long period of time.
Dmitry, how do you respond to what Alexander has been basically saying about the fact that the last year's vote was manipulated for political reasons, and that Putin has always been harboring this desire to stay in power for as long as it takes?
Well, speaking about staying in power forever or not forever, Joseph Biden, who is now the president of the United States and who is 78, which is 11 years older than Putin, basically he said that he would try to run for the second time when his term expires, which puts him at the age of 86 at the end of that term.
The debate, by the way, Dmitry, the debate is not about the age. The debate is about, in Western democracies like in the US, he has the right to go for 2 terms. I mean, there's absolutely...
It's about the age, because the Western press keeps saying that Putin is going to stay in power until he is 86. I don't think this is true, but if Biden has his way, he will stay for exactly the same age. So that is like a response to the world standards. I think we are not worse off than the United States in terms of democracy and the terms involved. And the second thing, Alexander was right when he said that officially this procedure that took place in 2020 was not called a referendum, even though the world press called it a referendum. But 100% of the eligible voters in Russia had the right to come to the, to the voting stations. I came, all of my family came, and the majority certainly approved the set of changes to the constitution that was included there. It was not only the new rules of electing the president. Basically, Putin is going to be an exception. All the other presidents will not be able to stay for more than 2 terms. But also there were many other things which people supported, such as defining the family as a union of a man and woman, which makes it impossible to have a one-sex marriage, very unpopular in Russia, and other measures which are supposed to protect Russia from Western influences. They were definitely supported by the people, and Putin's candidacy was, I think, part of that package. I challenge Alexander to say that the majority of Russians does not share that view. I know that there is a certain part of the population that doesn't, but of course the majority supports these values and supports these course of action.
Marco, this is exactly the same narrative that the president has been using, which is basically over 78% of the people voted for the wide-ranging package of reforms, and therefore this is a legitimate task which is I'm doing, staying for power for as long as it takes, because I have the right now for 2 consecutive 6-term tenures.
Yes, I don't want to judge if the referendum was, conducted with full respect of the laws or not. In every country in which there is a referendum, you have this kind of dynamic. One thing is certain, Putin is in the position to be at the top of the Russian political system for another 15 years, maybe if he will run in the future. Sincerely, I'm not sure at 100% that it will be in charge until 2036. And if this will happen, it can be not a good sign for Russian political system, because maybe it will mean that the political system is in a stalemate and all the pyramid of power is not able and won't be able to find a successor, so find a new equilibrium, and in this context maybe Putin it's a kind of conservative solution. And I don't know, and I think that if this happens, it will be the repetition of something that Russia in its history knows very well, that is the ancient period of stagnation during the Brezhnev administration.
Alexander, on the other hand, it could be an indication that the opposition, fragmented as ever, could not put together a new platform, a candidate that could have a chance to challenge Putin in the past, challenge the right to go for the vote in 2020, and tell people it's about time to reverse that trend. Where is the opposition?
Well, basically in jail. The answer is very simple. So everyone who poses a threat, at least more or less, they go to jail immediately. When I was a candidate in 2019 in elections to Moscow City Duma, which is, this is just a regional level, not a federal one. We didn't expect the harsh reaction from the authorities. still, as long as we started to pose a threat to the candidates from the pro-Kremlin party, we all went to jail. I had to spend 28 days in jail. I was released then, but some of the people are still in jail. So I was just lucky one. And Alexei Navalny is definitely a figure who can challenge Vladimir Putin. But everyone, they first of all, they passed all the necessary laws to put anyone whom they don't like into jail. So they have already passed every law to make any voting totally controllable. Even if the frauds are being exposed, they just don't care about them. So we cannot even say anything about the majority or non-majority supporting constitutional reform or Putin, because there is no free and fair elections. Mm-hmm. So this is absolutely irrelevant saying that we are the majority and you are not the majority, because we do not know that.
Okay. Dmitry, you were talking about the Western perception to the political life in Russia. Now, I would like to ask you about those who voted for the changes last year and for Putin to stay in power. What was their justification? Was it political stability? Was it economy? Or the fact for many Russians that this is the most powerful man that guaranteed stability and turned the chapter of Yeltsin?
Let me first remind you that 22% of the people who took part in the vote on the new changes to the constitution, 22% of the people voted against. And there was even one region where these people were a majority. And no one was put in jail for that. And as for the elections to the Moscow City Duma last year, several opposition candidates got into the Duma, including in my district where I live in Moscow. And if people were put in jail, it was usually for non-authorized rallies. If people organized non-authorized rallies, some of them ended up in jail for short periods, as our colleague has said, as Alexander has said, it would be 20 days, 15 days. But I wouldn't say that, all of Russia's political opposition leaders are in jail. Ksenia Sobchak is not in jail. He ran against Putin. Several other people like Grigory Yavlinsky and others, they are all operating. They all have their parties which are operating and which sometimes win local elections. Why people voted for extending Putin's stay in power? Well, let me just give you facts. When Putin came to power, he had a terrible war in Chechnya. He ended it. We can be happy or not happy with the new Chechen government, but there is no war. That's very important. This is something the West has failed to achieve in Iraq, has failed to achieve in Syria, has failed to achieve in Libya. In Chechnya, there is no war. The other achievement, of course, was economic stabilization, because at least during his first 2 terms, Russia was growing rapidly. The growth slowed down in 2008 because of the international financial and economic crisis. You remember the crisis of 2008. Russia basically won the war in Syria. The Soviet Union did not win any wars against Israel.
I wouldn't qualify it as such, because Syria remains divided, destroyed, almost 250,000 of people killed. It's a nightmare scenario. I wouldn't qualify that as a success anyway.
Well, I wouldn't qualify it as a success for Syria, because, of course, the terrible civil war with foreign powers participating, non-invited foreign powers, Russia and Iran were the only powers invited. But the jihadists failed to seize power in Syria. The country is still
I see your point.
united. Yes,
I see where you're aiming. You're obviously saying that this is someone who has restored some sense of dignity to the Russian people, but that it remains to be seen, because there is a divide as far as that perception is concerned. Marco, in China, in Egypt, and in other parts of the world, we've seen leaders trying to remove the term limits and extend their powers. Is this the rise of authoritarianism in the world?
In this moment, in some part of the world, there is this trend, and I think that keeping this very strong leader in powers for years and years, it's a kind of try of stabilization in very troublesome time and historical moment. We are living in a world in which there are many conflicts in very dangerous areas and very sensitive areas of the world, like you said, in Libya and in Syria. We are facing the pandemic of COVID-19, and in certain parts of the world, we have to tell it, this strong leadership has achieved very important economic goals. Mm-hmm. And this is this kind of contract between authoritative powers and citizens. And the contract is economic stabilization and wealth in exchange of strong leadership and rule. I don't know if this will last in the future to come.
Okay, Alexander, in 2012, we saw the opposition building momentum, and when it was opposed to the reform that paved the way for Putin to stage a political comeback. You spoke about the crackdown on the opposition. Where does this leave the opposition in the future? Are they likely to reinvent themselves, try to deal with an ever-changing political landscape in Russia?
Well, you know, if comparing to 2012, of course, there were a lot more possibilities, legal possibilities for the different candidates to be at least registered, to take part in elections. Nowadays, in most cases, you're not being even registered. A few cases, yeah. In some cases, some of the candidates may be registered if there is no competition with the pro-Kremlin party. Some of the constituencies are being freed just to make the candidates from another parties, which are also pro-Kremlin, like Just Russia or a Communist Party, they sometimes just do not take part in those elections in order to give a chance for those fake opposition to become deputies or something. In those regions, sometimes real opposition win just because United Russia do not control the situations there, and they say just to the rest of the candidates, it's your problem. So this is the only possibility left, legal possibility left to take part in elections.
Okay.
That's why saying that there is still opposition, it's totally incorrect. There is, as long as you try to unite, I mean, you immediately have problems. In Russia, you may have searches just for nothing, just to confiscate everything.
Dmitry, in less than 30 seconds, if you don't mind. This is someone, just for the sake of staying in power, changes the basic law of Russia. Whoever comes next would just be tempted to do the same thing. And again, we will end up with a really opaque political system in Russia just because someone fancies staying in power indefinitely.
I don't think so. I think when relations with the West improve, and they will improve because the West will come to its senses, there will be more plurality of views and more choices for Russians, and this time is already coming.
Okay, let's see what happens. Dmitry Babich, Marco Di Liddo, Alexander Soloviev, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you very much. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.